based on not what was best for them.
Coming, city
What was
manager.
best for them financially. They would give me a total knee replacement.
Yuki, do you have any other planning commissioners coming? Do you know if Brandon's coming? That's all you have, right? Wait. Do we know if Brandon's coming? Is he here?
I think Andrew said that. Andrew, didn't you say that Brandon was coming? He was asking. Did you say he was asking what he was going to present?
Welcome, everyone. We're going to start this meeting. I know we're a little behind schedule and we have a 6 o'clock study session, so we'll try to at least give you the time that we promised. So thank you very much, Planning Commission, for joining us. We'll start with our chair, Yuki Akizi. If you'd like to start and go around the room, we can introduce ourselves for those of us who don't know each other. Okay. And I guess we have we'd like to discuss the issues and Yuki, can you speak in the microphone? I think just turn it on. It turns green on the bottom so that everyone can hear you. It turns green on the bottom when it's on. Thank you. So everyone can hear you now.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and to bring up the issues that we like to go over. We try to do that with our ongoing meetings, and we try to make proposals and add items to the agenda on some of the items that we'd like to address. In particular, Commissioner Jane has brought up a lot of things that he'd like to see when we update the zoning rules, so maybe he can talk to that a bit. So what would be the best way to, best format? Should we have each commissioner bring up questions? And
it would be nice, so we can hear your comments, your concerns, your suggestions for us. We're here to really listen to you and the commission.
Thank you. I guess if I may start, my most pressing question is the hiring plans for the planning department because of all the turnovers we've had, and we most recently lost Gloria, and we've been working with her for a long time, and we have Andrew thankfully here, so maybe he can describe to us how many openings you have and how you think you're doing with the recruiting.
Thank you. That's a really important question.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew Crabtree, Director of Community Development. So we currently have, in the Planning Division, 3 vacancies. Well, technically 2, because Gloria is still occupying her position, but she's using some of her leave time and plans to leave at the end of the year, but she'll be here tonight. We also have the planning manager, the division manager position is vacant, and then there's a new principal planner position that was just added into the budget this last round in July that's also vacant. So we're currently well into the recruitment process for the planning manager. We've been using an outside recruiter. We do have interviews scheduled for next week, our first round of interviews on that, and our goal is to have a candidate finalize and bring someone on board by the end of the year. And then we're also in the process of starting the recruitments for the principal planner position, and we would be able to use that recruitment for both the development review officer position as well as the new principal planner that was added to focus on long-range planning activity. So that will be a couple more months out in process, but sometime mid next year we hope to have that filled. And we have been designated one of our associate planners to act as development review officer. Rebecca Bustos is currently in that role, but we're going to rotate through different planners and sort of fill the gap until we have someone permanently in that position.
I wanted to add that the principal planner job description needs to be amended, and we'll be bringing that forward to council. Is it November 21st or
Yeah,
December
believe-
5th?
I think
One
it's
of
on
those 2 days.
21st.
Yeah. So you will see the principal planner new job description
Okay.
that we're proposing.
Okay, good to know.
And we enjoy working with Rebecca, who's filling in, and Ella and other people. But what are your transition plans? Because it seems like they've had to step up and take over the jobs that were that got vacated before they were able to fully come on board. Is the impression I got. Maybe I'm not, I'm not here every day, so I don't know. But that's the impression I got. I mean, they're working very hard and doing a good job, but.
Andrew, if you'd like to answer that, are those staff members that staff the commission?
Those are the
is-
planners we work with, people who present to us and
Okay.
people we interact with at the AR architecture review meetings.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Certainly do work with them. And we also have, we have Kevin Riley in a consulting role, sort of behind the scenes, but he's also providing support for that, filling in as our acting planning manager as well. So we continue to work with our folks, and certainly went through a sort of an internal selection process to vet candidates in terms of their readiness to step into the acting role, and recognize anytime someone takes on new responsibility, there's some growth and development opportunity there as well, but continuing to work with them and hope to provide the service that you're looking for.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other commissioner who would like to ask questions? Commissioner Kelly, and do I need to, please just go ahead. I'm not going to be the chair today, so.
You're doing a great chair job, Yuki.
Okay. A couple things that have come up, obviously, on the planning commission when residents are concerned is parking and traffic. And a couple things that I've learned is, one, regarding parking, is we don't have enough studies regarding our own newer parking complexes so we can see how many spaces are being utilized. And if we know that, we can actually allow a little bit more density, not have to change any heights. It would be helpful to do like a study of some of the new apartment complexes, like at 2 a.m., like San Jose State has done in Sunnyvale, in San Jose, to see what the utilization rate is. Now, regarding traffic, which again, El Camino has been a hotbed of concerns, Commissioner Jane and I have kind of talked about the reality that most people currently don't park along the El Camino or Stevens Creek for that matter, and these are major thoroughfares. There are a couple parcels that do need the street parking, but I think they could be taken care of by either a shared parking arrangement with adjacent parcels if they become redeveloped, or with some of these modern vending-style parking structures which can basically stack cars, have them go in and out in a relatively convenient method. And I think the project along the El Camino that we were just at yesterday had discussions about just structure just like that, where people would pull in, they'd press a button, the car goes up, next car can go in. And since there's so few parcels along the El Camino that don't have on-site parking, if we could get rid of the requirement to have parking along Stevens Creek or the El Camino, and I understand El Camino is a state highway, it would be beneficial to improve traffic flow. And if we could partner with, say, Sunnyvale and do it basically from Santa Clara all the way to the end of Sunnyvale, I think we could improve traffic flow and potentially reduce the overall speed limit in El Camino, but with traffic flowing more effectively due to less congestion, we could alleviate some of the concerns that residents have regarding traffic impact of the development. So I would hope that we could at least study it. At the Stevens Creek Urban Village, we looked at multiple designs to get rid of parking along Stevens Creek, which would include a bike path. And I thought we should do the same on the Santa Clara side for Stevens Creek and for the El Camino. Thank you.
So, Steve, in the urban village plan on Stevens Creek, did they study the Santa Clara side, or were the studies only on the San Jose side?
They gave us multiple designs, but they said obviously it would be most effective if Santa Clara and San Jose could agree on a design for Stevens Creek, preferably removing street parking, and that would require something for some of the smaller parcels that need that street parking, either an automated parking structure or shared parking arrangements. But if it was done, I think traffic would flow more effectively along Stevens Creek.
And I like your idea about seeing how the developments that we have approved are performing in terms of parking, traffic, just the overall operations of them. I know there's been council members that have asked for that current data so we can see, because as these projects come forward, they say, well, we just want the same, parking ratio that they got over there, but we don't know if that's working, especially for senior housing or affordable housing. Is it working with the lower requirement for parking? Are people really using mass transit? Like, what's actually happening? So I think it's important that we come up with a way to figure out, especially with all the new developments we have, how are they operating now? And were they to the same measurements and standards that were the goals for the projects?
The study that we saw that came in front of us when they did a presentation is that each parking space is effectively $50,000. And if they could reduce excess parking spaces and reduce, say, 5 spaces, that's a significant amount of money for the developer.
Well, I get that, and is that warranted for what's actually happening, or are we reducing spaces and then the tenants are parking in the neighborhoods, which cause all the angst, chooses word, and the problems?
I would agree that Sunnyvale, which has several projects that they showed us stats for, would be a comparable city to us along the El Camino, but obviously we would like to see more data. So any future projects, we would hopefully ask for maybe more affordable housing if we allow less parking. So we restrict the developer only to the point that is necessary. If it's not necessary, then we can basically say we feel comfortable with less parking, but we would like to see more affordable housing.
Is that anything, Andrew, that we look at in the El Camino specific plan? Or do we look at any of these types of things, or is that additional data that we would need?
So talking about the parking first, we probably won't look at it just because a lot of the new projects that have been approved are too new. A lot of them haven't been built and fully occupied yet. So the timing might not work, but it's certainly something, once we have more of them up and running, that we could do a survey and get back to the council on data on that. The earlier question about the on-street parking issue, we can look at that through the specific plan. We intend to look at the right-of-way and how it's being used. So that would be a yes on that one.
I would add, in terms of your comment, that we do look at the neighborhood impact of some of these buildings. There have been some where we've wanted to make sure if they have parking or if there's a question about parking, it's not easy for the new residents to go into the neighborhood. I mean, there's some sort of breakage. And so that is a criteria I think we look at.
And if I may add, like recently Planning Commission had a study session with transformers, and that was very objective. Like they did a study in various cities, including Sunnyvale, San Francisco, and mainly the topic was utilization of the traffic or the parking spots in multi-dwelling housings, and they were able to convince, and my idea is, or our idea should be, we should put our developers in touch with those people before they even start the project. That gives them the real quantitative data which they can analyze before going into building or coming up with how many parkings we need, and then they can submit the same data to the city, basically. And then it's our duty to analyze all that data, whether transformer data is good, and that most of the data is free, basically. And basically, it's a non-profit, and we were very convinced about what they were talking about, actually, on that front. So, and if I may take my own time, I can continue on a different topic. Okay.
Go ahead, Raj.
Okay, so my other macro level comments are, like if you see our two zoning map and the general plan map, we are not in sync, and that causes a lot of issues with the residents, and even as a planning commissioner or as a council members.
We were waiting for someone to bring that up.
So that's what I said. So if we can prioritize that, it will be much easier for our residents to understand the future developments, and it's much easier as a planning commissioner to make a very quantitative and good faith decision-making process on that. When they don't sync, then subjectivity comes into the picture, and that subjectivity is not at all good for decision-making process, neither for us nor for the resident on the shelf on that. So that's one. And general plan update, I think we are working on that, and that should be.
Well, I was just going to say the zoning ordinance, yes, that's been the bane of countless planning commissioners for decades now. So, but there has been, contract given to, or we were bringing on board a consultant to help us get that done, because I think we're at the point, even when I was on the general plan steering committee, and then, at the same time I was on the planning commission, we were struggling. We were like going through parcel by parcel trying to do cleanup on some of it. But I believe that Andrew's department is engaging a consultant to help us get that zoning ordinance, so that so that hopefully it'll, make it easier for everybody.
One aspect that has come up, and I know you're aware of this, is regional mixed use in the general plan versus zoning on there. That there is no regional mixed use in the zoning criteria.
So we do have on tonight's council meeting agenda the contract with the consultant that's going to help us finish the zoning code update. And then I would also mention too that with the specific plans, we've been developing and implementing rezonings along with the specific plan adoption. So for Lawrence, we did that. So, as we work on the El Camino Real specific plan too, that's part of the scope for that to really try to address, I think, where a lot of the community concern obviously has been through that process, but then more globally through the zoning code update as well.
Yeah. Okay. My next one is the traffic studies. So each project has some traffic studies data, and idea is to, and traffic being one of the topmost quality of life issues for the residents right now, one of the topmost. And idea is to, if I know level of service concept is going out, new concept is coming up, but idea is to, if we can proactively let the residents, or as a information, everybody knows which intersections are current level of service at F or D or something very close. If we display that and broadcast that, any developer coming in the vicinity of that will proactively see, hey, this is already level F. We have to be careful about adding something, or the location of that particular development should be considered, whether this is a good location because of the traffic issues we are facing. Because in the recent, approval on one of the projects, the traffic study, as I mentioned earlier in the planning and the council meeting too, like I was surprised how the traffic data was placed on the reports, 2012 versus 2017, level of service improved on Scott and El Camino, which it's not even imaginable, like 2012, 2000, but the data shows that. I don't know whether the data manipulation was there or the method of calculating that level of service was not right. So that was not even close. Like, how can the level of service on the same intersection improve in 2017 versus 2012? And worse than that was in a report which was generated in May 16 versus November 16, 2000, no, May, last year versus this year, May, we had a number of counts on that were reduced by 200 counts on the same intersections. And this is what the data I presented to you on Scott and El Camino for the Summerhill. And I did not get, although hexagon study people mentioned that they took a new data from the VTA, I searched the whole report. There was no mention of that data was taken from the VTA. All the reports were based on May 16, 2016 data. And I don't know how they reduced the 200 count, going south on Scott and going north on Scott. Exactly on one side by 200 counts on peak time and on one side by 199. And nobody could substantiate that. I'm asking, even on the last planning commission, I raised that issue, and I'm still waiting for that report, what was it based on? So these are quantitative things. Like on subjective things, I can understand, okay, this is subjective, I can make a decision on subjectivity. But when we see something which is quantified, it has to be proven, and it should look good to everybody, basically. And if we are not giving that data in how it should be, it's not a transparency, basically. So we need to look at data. I'm still waiting for it, right? For that data, like what VTA data prompted those changes. And it was reduced. If it was increased, I can imagine the traffic is going bad to worse every day. I could have imagined, but it was reduced on that. So that data is has to be verified when presented to Planning Commission or the Council.
Going on that, when is the level of service going away? Is it next year? Is it, and then how is traffic going to be calculated when that does go away?
So that's a big question that I don't think we have a specific answer to yet. There's been, so 2018 has been out there as the year that the cities will no longer be required to use level of service. But that's not to say we can't continue to. So that's one point. And then, there's been discussion around using vehicle miles traveled, VMT, as an alternate measure to look at traffic. But I think as we get closer to implementation, and then some jurisdictions in state have already started to roll that out, the challenges around using VMT are becoming increasingly apparent as well. So there's a lot of debate going on now amongst transportation professionals about what is the best approach going forward. So I don't think you'll see, one day we'll just turn the switch and LOS will go away and we'll start using VMT. I think increasingly our traffic studies are going to use both to a degree, and also try to focus more on sort of almost a qualitative analysis, trying to get more to how people actually perceive traffic, and not just, LOS, F, or D, or whatever that, which to some people doesn't mean a whole lot. So that, I hope that answers your question. It's hard, the state kind of keeps adjusting their guidance, and so, we all have to kind of stay flexible on this issue.
So I heard we have the opportunity to use LOS until we decide not to use.
And we can continue to use it, but not necessarily as part of our CEQA thresholds, but we can continue to use it as a policy tool. And I think that's where we're moving.
Patty?
So how do we incorporate things like Waze and even navigation on your phone, which can pinpoint at any time, at any moment, where there's traffic backups or where there's heavy traffic or where there's a stoppage. I mean, how do we feed that in? Because it seems to me that that information now is so readily available at your fingertips anytime to just anyone who's got a phone. And that seems to me to be far more accurate than traffic counts or LOS or anything like that. So when do we get into that digital age on traffic patterns?
Okay. So I think one issue around that, is the availability of data. So Google, or who owns Waze, I believe, and those folks don't necessarily make all that, the data they collect, available. So we're still somewhat dependent on traffic counts, which go out and, measure actual counts, but on certain days, and it may not, collect all the variations. I think one of the big impacts of Waze and other things like that is that traffic is getting more distributed, as it alerts people to alternate means of traveling. And the traffic modelers are very much aware of these things and discussing them and trying to adapt to them. Also, Uber and Lyft are having big impacts on people's travel behavior. Self-driving cars, when they come, will have an even bigger impact. And as traffic modeling tries to look 20 years out, that's a big consideration as well. So all those things are expected to affect people's driving behavior, and it's an interesting time, I think, to be a traffic engineer, but challenging too. So they are looking at those things, and I'll see if I can find out more about efforts, if they're out there, to get access to the kind of data that Google is collecting through, either through people voluntarily subscribing to Waze, or if you have an Android phone and you allow them to know where you are, they collect that data, but they don't just readily make it public either.
I guess what I'm asking is, because once again, government lags far behind the private sector, is it possible, or do the consultants have the availability to get that kind of information digitally themselves? I mean, do they have the technology to do that? And why aren't we developing that technology on our own so that we can get these kinds of reports and make a whole lot more sense out of them? Because I think Raj is right. And Suds too, some of these means that we're using, I think Steve said the same thing, is kind of becoming outmoded and not giving us the true picture.
Sure. So I would suggest, if that's a topic that council's interested in exploring further, we can bring in experts and so forth. It's defer to the city manager on how to take that up.
I think we should look at what other cities are doing as well, because I know Sunnyvale and Mountain View are going through that. When we saw Transform, they addressed the issues that they are going through with Sunnyvale. Obviously, it's an expense to the technology you're talking about, but we can reduce that expense by merging data with those groups, similar cities. They're as similar as they can be, right next door.
Sunnyvale resource. We have a Sunnyvale resource.
You want to say something?
From Sunnyvale side.
Oh. Oh.
Sunnyvale has adopted green trips for all of their EIRs and transit studies. So green trips is this modeling software that's created by Transform through government grants to basically look at, when you put this development somewhere, what are the traffic impacts of that development. And it would be nice if Santa Clara, that's why I brought Transform here to give that presentation, if Santa Clara would adopt green trips as part of their formal process.
And Andrew, my question to you was, at a league, the last time we went to a league seminar thing, they were bringing up GIS. How come we're not using that as far as the trips and looking at holistically the city of Santa Clara and then border cities?
No, well, we do. So, and we use the same regional traffic models to do our VMT analysis, to do our LLS analysis as these other cities. I mean, Green Trips is kind of an added-on tool, but we do holistically look at, when we do large development projects, general plan amendments, and so forth, we do those traffic models, and we certainly don't end our analysis at the border. Maybe 15 years ago, we might have, but it's not the case, and so.
So
yeah, I
we are
think-
going beyond the border, because what Raj is talking about is when they go to, I guess, review or CEQA a planning project, and if they don't have all the data, how can they make a comprehensive decision on something? Because sometimes it might get bounced up to us. But how do we know that they're given everything that they need to make the right decision as far as, because Waze definitely will cut people through our city. They just go wherever they need to go. So how do we stop some of that? I know we can't, but how do we lessen the blow to the residents? And it is the quality of life. And then, and I know what you're talking about, that's your street, Scott. And that's people coming through, it's like going one way, coming back the other way. And how do we, I know in Lafayette, they do that break where it's 2 lanes and then 2 lanes coming back or whatever. I think it alleviates some of it, but I think the rest of our city is totally impacted by that, especially if there's an accident somewhere and then Waze comes out and everybody's cutting through the regular,
So
streets.
I heard on NPR that the city of Fremont actively works with Waze.
They do.
And they'll put in no left turns in certain places. They'll put barriers, then they'll notify Waze, so their maps are updated to keep people from going through the neighborhoods. So the city needs to get active in.
We're not doing that?
I don't know if we are.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I don't know if we are.
I think that's a big issue when we're talking about traffic corridors, because I do think those are an efficient way to optimize, make sure, well, a lot on traffic corridors, but I know on Stevens Creek particularly, Stevens Creek is basically controlled by the San Jose Planning Department. I think we need to get into a position where we're equal partners to that. And no matter what, there's going to be increased traffic, and I think for the neighbors, if we can look through that cross-through traffic, it becomes very easy when things get jammed up to just shoot off to neighborhoods. And I think that should be an important part of what we're looking at, and particularly when we're looking at traffic corridors.
And I know you and I live that, because that's what happens
I
when.
didn't want to bring that.
Goes through our neighborhood.
But it's not just our neighborhood. I mean, it continues all
No,
along.
it's all over.
Right.
But you brought up a good point. Do you all go to different planning commission meetings on our borders? Does someone go to Sunnyvale and someone go to Milpitas and someone go to Cupertino and San Jose? Do you know what's going on our
I don't
borders?
believe so, but in that particular case, San Jose did, let people know that it was occurring, and people on their planning group did let people know they're occurring. Whether they listened to the Santa Clara side or not, I kind of question, because I know we had a petition not to put a signal and what we thought would be encouraging cross-through traffic on there, and ultimately it didn't have the impact on the San Jose side, so the signal got built. And I think people can look at that particularly. And there were planning department members attending those, and I just think that's something to really be watching for when we're talking about bordering cities, to make sure both ways are considered, and maybe it's going to take even a county involvement to do some of that.
Oh, it's going to be regional, because it's.
Yeah, or even the mass transit issues, possibilities. Yeah.
So I just did a quick check on Waze, and Waze does offer their traffic data to governments. If you form partnership, as for example, San Francisco can use their data for make data-driven infrastructure decisions.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, we have to think out of the box for these upcoming issues, instead of just depending on a one-day data from Hexagon or something, and which they extrapolate for another year. We can get a current data. We can get a current data for a week. We can get a current data for a month, what has happened in the last month or so. And Waze and Google Maps and all that stuff, we do have availability of those. And that way we can make much more judicious decisions in front of our residents, basically, versus depending on a data which is 1 year old, and that too, to me, it was manipulated. And let me know if it wasn't. Otherwise, I'm still waiting for the answer on that it wasn't. Yeah. Okay.
Just if I may add one thing on some of the comments, that the various cities, each have our traffic sort of in-house experts, and they meet and talk and share knowledge, and they're also sort of under the guidance of the VTA, which is our sort of regional traffic analysis agency, which puts out ground rules that they expect all the cities to follow. So there there is a coordination amongst the different cities and how we do this, and kind of an agreed upon set of rules that we follow.
No, I agree to that. Like VTA is our overseeing body for that. But my request was, how did we reduce those trips? Where is the data, where is the document when VTA says, oh, okay, Scott and El Camino, these 200 trips are reduced now at this month, or this after 6 months of that study. That's what I'm looking at. Like, if VTA can give us that data, I'll be convinced. I can tell my residents, hey, this was the data which created this issue. But if VTA has not given us any data, and we are just taking a escape route, oh, it was a VTA which gave us that data. That does not fulfill the requirement. It does not satisfy me, and it should not satisfy none of you, basically, over here, if that's the case. And that's I have been requesting that VTA study, which was the common document which reduced those trips. Whereas, according to me, the trips have increased since then, and they should not have been reduced on those.
So you're looking for consistent data that you can rely on that's consistent with each of these projects?
I'm looking, like, if we can use Waze and other stuff which can give us a much current data, that's the goal. But even in something which has historical data, that should be accurate. That should not be manipulated, or that should not, according to me, it was manipulated. I may be wrong, unless I see some VTA data. So that should be what it is, basically, so that it should be convincing to us that, okay, this was data, because the report specifically mentioned the data was collected on 16th May 2016. Whole report is based on that. Both the reports said that same thing. There was no mention of VTA data on that. And then I see all the data changes on those. So that was the point. And if we all are not convinced, I think we are not making a good decision on those things as such right now.
So I know we have a new city manager, so I just wanted to sort of explain my basic interests. So I retired from high tech to basically focus on climate change 8 years ago. And so most of what I do is related to climate change. So I got involved in planning because a few years ago, Santa Clara was doing its climate action plan. And I was very disappointed in how that worked. It was basically done through consultants. So I've complained for a long time to council that we didn't have a sustainability manager, when other cities, smaller cities like Cupertino, Mountain View, and Palo Alto had multiple sustainability managers. So it's finally sort of worked its way up into the priority of the council that we need a sustainability manager. But I come to find out that while we have a half-time sustainability manager, there's no budget for a sustainability manager. It's not in the budget. So for me, it's very important that we continue to make this a priority, that we have a sustainability manager, that the next climate action plan that comes out is produced not just by consultants in a vacuum, but is done with a sustainability manager who knows the departments and really can work with the departments. The other thing is that I was at Teresa's monthly community meeting this month, and one of the residents said in the same sentence, complained about traffic and the cost of housing. And whenever we have these projects that come before Planning Commission, the residents come out with their pitchforks and talk about all this housing that's being built around Santa Clara. And I went to the APA meeting a couple of months ago, and California ranks 49th out of 50 states in per capita housing. And that's why the governor has been all over this. And we need to educate our residents on that building more housing will reduce the cost of housing, and it's a supply and demand, and the residents don't get it. And then if we do it in the right places around transit, then we can actually reduce traffic. I mean, Raj is saying, how can it be that we add projects and traffic goes down, or, so on? But it can, and if it's done in the right places. So there's a few things that I find lacking in sort of the way that we're doing things. Our density bonuses should be stacked. So if you build a project near transit, once you've taken your transit bonus, you have no incentive to do LEED. So you have no incentive to do affordable housing because you've already lost all your density bonuses. So the other thing we should go towards is form-based coding, which is, you know, residents complain about really tall structures on El Camino, but you can build a 3-story building that's 100 units per acre, but they're micro units, and we need to start talking about micro units to create affordable housing for people. The other thing is that there are certain places in Santa Clara where we need 8 and 12-story buildings. Tasman East is ripe for that. Hunter Storm is ripe for, I mean, that project should be twice as big as it is right now because that traffic is not going to be in Santa Clara, you know? So we should we're desperate for housing. We're, you know, if we wanted to just go from 49th to 40th place, which is where New York is, we have to build 2.5 million more housing units in California. And that's why housing is so expensive. So the other thing I'm interested in is we don't actually have funds for adding bicycle paths in Santa Clara. Everything we do is from government grants. So we have kind of no skin in the game for biking in Santa Clara. So I would like to raise that as a priority to add more biking.
We met with BPAC, I think, last month and talked about that
Okay, good.
in detail.
Good. The other thing is I would love to see us have, you know, Santa Clara to be a place where tourists want to come and not just go to a football game, but to spend time and walk around the city. So we need to have public art. We need to have places for people to want to come here and, you know, enjoy the scenery. And so we have no public art fee right now, whereas other cities have public art fees. The other thing is that I would like to see, again, I've been a huge advocate of eliminating parking along El Camino Real. During the bus rapid transit study, they found that there's sufficient off-street parking to handle all the businesses on El Camino. So we should get rid of the parking on El Camino and create bike lanes. It would be great to be able to, and it also would speed the buses because the buses get bogged down by all the parked cars. So that's pretty much what I had. The other thing that is a little bit concerning to me is rather than do a general plan update, we have about, what, 8 or 9 specific area plans now? And the problem with specific area plans is they don't have as much community input as a general plan update does. So that we really need to bring the community in and educate them on the need for transit-oriented development, for the need for less parking. And in the, you know, with a lot of the projects we do right now, we have asked them to do a TDM plan, a traffic demand management plan. But in the last couple of projects, I've said, well, when you're doing this annual reporting, why don't you just report your parking utilization so we can make data-driven decisions? We can say, oh yeah, we only need 1.3 parkings per unit instead of 1.7, and you're spending millions of dollars that could be used to reduce the cost of housing in these units. So, you know, I'm all for trying to get more affordable housing in Santa Clara, but more transit-oriented development.
So some of these issues that Commissioner Jane has raised have been already raised at planning commission meetings. So how can we make sure that those inputs are incorporated into our zoning ordinance update and general plan update, et cetera? We try to make sure that they're part of our minutes, but...
Well, 2 things. And first off is that, you know, I'm taking notes, and we try to, as staff, be responsive to, you know, we know what your concerns are, and we'll try to address them as we come before you. And then the zoning code update, part of our scope is to include some study sessions with the Planning Commission to get your input on that, as well as the City Council. And, you know, same with specific plans as they come through. They ultimately go through your body as well for recommendations. So you have opportunities there as well to make recommendations and ultimately council make decisions on what to include in those documents.
And we're talking about...
Part of it is that we need to educate the public. I think the public just doesn't understand, some of this new urban development, how to build livable cities, how to build cities that people want to live in that are affordable. And a general plan update, I think, would bring a lot more of the public into the process.
And I would also mention, that was one of our goals with the placemaking series that we did this spring, and we're looking at organizing another round of that. And to a degree, that sort of mimics part of what you might have seen in a general plan update process, where you have speakers and educational opportunities up front too. So we're trying to address that need.
So some of the things that that were just raised are pretty drastic departure from like what we have now: micro units, fewer parking spots, and ultra high density, ultra high rise. Are we going to be looking at those things when we update our zoning rules?
The short answer is yes. All those things are on the definitely on the list of items to, parking, micro units. You mentioned the regional mixed use.
Form-based coding.
Zoning district, form-based code, or form-based elements. All those things, I think, are definitely on the list.
And also, some of the things brought up, like the bicycle path funds. We talked at length with the BPAC committee about looking into that and how necessary they are, and you can't just rely on that grant funding for that. So we're going to have to look at other opportunities for funding for that. The public art was brought up with our cultural commission dinner, so we're looking very seriously about putting together something to make it a requirement for developments in terms of public art and financing public art. So that's also in, I'm going to ask our city manager, I'm sure she has a plan at some point for the sustainability manager. I know we have a half-time or part-time person now. At some point, we're going to be expanding that role for the city because it's absolutely necessary to have that. So a lot of the things, Tasman East, that discussion about the higher, denser properties, putting the high density in the right spots. I mean, that's very important. So those are all ongoing discussions. A lot of them are going to take place too in our placemaking efforts in working with the city to get the community involved in it. When you talk about education, it's not like just throwing information out at our community. We have to get them involved in the process and to be like hands-on involved. To change, ways of thinking. That there's no other way to do that because there's a lot of resistance out there now because we're in a suburban community trying to make it from suburban to urban. It doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of education and a lot of work that has to take place. So we have to have the patience and the structure to get the community involved with that. I know we don't have a whole lot of time left. I wanted to ask another question and then go down the council to see if there's other questions as well.
Could I make one
Besides,
comment? Okay,
I'm sorry. Let me just ask my questions and then you can finish my, just because I'll forget them. I'm getting old. But besides the larger developments in town, what are you seeing in terms of the single family or the residents coming in for their approvals? Do you see trends of any particular thing that are going on in the city? And then the other question I have is, what kind of workload are you having on your planning commission meetings? Are you having a tremendous amount of items, or are they well spaced out? What are you seeing? What's coming before you?
It's been pretty slow since July. Our agenda items have been pretty light, and we've been, except for maybe one meeting that went on until 11:30 because of a lot of residents, it's been pretty fast. I think having 2 meetings a month helped, but also I get the feeling that there are fewer proposals coming in.
On the smaller scale, like one thing we need to look at it, the single-family guidelines. And we faced that issue on the architecture committee. Councilmember Teresa O'Neill is on that. We recently had a very typical situation, like entirely different type of a house in a row. So the guidelines are not very clear how to deal with it. So although we took a different aspect of it, a shadowing aspect of it to make sure it fits in neighborhood better, but those guidelines, I think, are due for revision, and they have to be more quantitative so that they're not that subjective. Yes, that was close to on
Yeah, we're
your
kind of going to have to make a decision. Are we going to go
Yes.
more restrictive or less restrictive? You know what I mean? So there's some.
Yes.
Can I comment on that? Because if I'm thinking of the same example that you're thinking of that caused such a controversy, the guidelines were really clear. The guidelines weren't properly applied from the beginning. And that's part of the problem is the guidelines, like for patio homes, this home was said, well, it's not a patio home, so the guidelines weren't followed. So we need to have the homeowners have the expectations of following those guidelines and knowing what those guidelines mean before they get so far along in the process that it's almost impossible to pull it back. It becomes a matter of fairness. It's not fair to the homeowner to pull back and say that. But if those guidelines are followed from the beginning and the expectations are set from the beginning, then I think we can work with almost all the applicants. And yeah, they may need updating, but, you know, I think a few bad examples don't make the guidelines wrong. You know what I'm saying?
No, actually, this one, Councilmember Mahan, this was very recent in the last meeting it came up. So it was amongst all the rent-style houses and there was this house which was not at all rent-style. So
the
there
guidelines
was
would
a
say
subjectivity
conform
on
to
that.
ranch-style homes, so why does it get so far in the process without somebody putting putting sort of a check on it and saying, wait a minute, here's the guidelines, this is what the guidelines say. So sometimes it's not the guidelines' fault.
Actually, the guidelines, we read multiple paragraphs, so they were contradicting each other, sort of. They were not very conforming, oh, okay, yeah, this is right. Then we look at the other side, oh, okay, this is right. So some of those bullets need to be refreshed, cleaned up.
And then
so that we can
earlier,
have
somebody wanted to build stairs going up outside the building, which we don't allow, but it's not in the guidelines. So there are minor things that it's probably best to just update,
Update the-
just house cleaning.
house clean, right, yep.
Sorry, Mike, you were going to say.
Yeah, if I could, I'd make just two general comments. I've enjoyed being on the Planning Commission, and one of the enjoyments is that we have a diversity of opinions and backgrounds, and it's real good. Unfortunately, Brandon isn't here tonight, but one of the nice things is having somebody younger here, because we're all homeowners and whatever, and if you go to a meeting, most of the people are homeowners. And again, 50% of our residents are renters on it, so I think the diversity has been real good. The other points I'm on, I think everybody's made up in general, but in the GP review, I think this council's done very strong supporter of affordable housing. What I don't see is exactly where that new affordable housing should be. I personally think it should be along the traffic corridors because those are the people who are more likely to be using some of the multi-transit deals. And I think Summerhill was a good example that, even though I had approved earlier once, I think where the council ended up on that, got a population that was more likely to use public transit. I think it was more appropriate population than we would have seen. And it gets back in general to, I guess I can't expand too much on it, but there's the general plan and the policy. My feeling a lot of times is that as a planning commission, we should be looking at the general plan and ultimately something becomes a policy issue that I shouldn't be as a planning commissioner dictating policy, but we can make recommendations. And I see the council as being the ones who make the policy.
And I concur with Commissioner O'Halloran. It's a big loss that Commissioner Wang is going to be gone. Somebody who is in a different phase of life, and so hopefully, the applicants that you're going to be reviewing, it's one of the things that you can keep in mind.
You found cheaper housing.
All right, well, I think does anyone else have anything to say, want to add? Kathy, all right, well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. This has been really wonderful to hear your thoughts and comments and where we need to go. We have a lot of work to do and a lot of planning, and we hope to count on your support in helping us navigate all of our planning issues because we do have a lot. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council member.
Thank you. So we're going to take an 7 to 8 minute break so they can put the council meeting back together, and then we'll start the study session. Thank you. Crazy. How about you?